Hello students, welcome back. We were dealing with chapter 6, life processes. In first lecture we studied about nutrition, and the second lecture we studied about digestion. Now the third important process, that is respiration. So now in this lecture we are going to study about respiration in detail. First of all, what is respiration? The chemical process of getting energy out of food is called respiration. Organisms intake food by the process of nutrition, and then that food is digested in the body by the process of digestion. Now, how to obtain energy from that food, that we will study in this process, that is process of respiration. So, respiration is a process of getting chemical energy out of the food. Respiration are of two types, aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. If the respiration is taking place in presence of oxygen, it is aerobic respiration. It occurs in most of the organisms, mainly in all higher forms of life. Anaerobic respiration is the respiration which takes place in absence of oxygen. So students, let us see what is aerobic and anaerobic respiration. First, aerobic respiration. It is the respiration which takes place in presence of oxygen, and it occurs in mitochondria. In this process, glucose is completely broken down into carbon dioxide and water. It releases large amount of energy. It occurs in most of the organisms, that is in all higher forms of life. Let us see the equation. Glucose, it is broken down into carbon dioxide and water, and large amount of energy is released in this process. So glucose, by the process of glycolysis, it gets converted into pyruvate, and this occurs in the cytoplasm where oxygen is not required. Now pyruvate is getting converted into carbon dioxide and water, and energy is released by the process of Krebs cycle, and it occurs in mitochondria where oxygen is required. Students, you might get confused what is this glycolysis, pyruvate, Krebs cycle, etc. You will be studying all this if you will opt for science in 11th and 12th in biology. For now, that is for 10th standard level, you will just have to remember the names and this equation for aerobic respiration as well as for anaerobic respiration also. Next is anaerobic respiration. Anaerobic respiration occurs in the absence of oxygen in the cytoplasm. It results into incomplete oxidation of glucose into lactic acid or ethyl alcohol, which is known as ethanol. In animals, lactic acid is formed, and in plants, ethyl alcohol is formed. Less amount of energy is released. It takes place in certain bacteria, yeast, and certain tissues of higher organisms. In human beings also, due to vigorous muscle exercise. So if we do exercise vigorously, the demand of oxygen is more than the supply of oxygen. So muscle cells will start respiring anaerobically for temporarily. Let us see how this take place in yeast and in muscle cell. Yeast, it is a lower organism. It does not require much energy. So its requirement is completed by the small amount of energy which is produced during anaerobic respiration. Glucose, by the process of glycolysis, gets converted into pyruvate. During this, oxygen is not required, and then by the process of fermentation, which also takes place in the absence of oxygen, ethanol is formed instead of carbon dioxide, which is formed during aerobic respiration, and energy is produced. In muscle cells, glucose, by the process of glycolysis, gets converted into pyruvate in the absence of oxygen, and then by the process of fermentation, which also takes place in absence of oxygen, lactic acid is produced, and along with that, energy is also released. So this is anaerobic respiration. So students, we studied types of respiration. Now let us see respiration process in detail, especially how it occurs in human beings. So, respiration is a complex process during which digested food is oxidized to release chemical energy. It is a biochemical process that takes place inside the cell. So, mainly the production of energy during the process of respiration is taking place inside the cell. It involves a series of reactions, and all of them are catalyzed by specific enzymes. The energy released is stored in the form of ATP molecule, that is adenosine triphosphate, and we know that this ATP is produced in mitochondria, which is known as powerhouse of the cell. Respiration occurs in two phases: external respiration, which is called breathing, and internal respiration, that is tissue respiration. So let us see now how this takes place. So what is breathing? Breathing is simply exchange of gases in which organism take in the oxygen from the environment and gives out carbon dioxide. So students, many of you are under the impression that respiration and breathing are same. They are not same. Breathing is a part of respiration. So now don't say that breathing means respiration only. Next, it is a physical or a mechanical process involving inhalation and exhalation. Different organisms have different organs for breathing. For example, fish breathe by gills, and land animals by nostrils and lungs. So students, let us study respiration in human beings. We'll try to understand it with the help of an example. Suppose that a log of wood is bought from the forest to obtain heat energy. Directly you will not get heat energy from the log. First of all, it is converted into small pieces, and then oxygen is given to it. Fire is created, and then heat energy is obtained. Similarly, when we intake food through process of nutrition, then that food is digested by the process of digestion, and now the thing left is to give it oxygen, and that is done by the process of respiration, and then we'll get energy from it. So we'll see now how this takes place with the help of this diagram. First of all, air enters to nasal cavity through the pair of nostrils and also through our mouth. From that it enters to pharynx, which is called throat. Then it reaches to larynx, that is vocal cords. You know why hairs are there in our nose? This hairs filters the air, removes the dirt and dust particles before it reaches to trachea. A narrow slit-like opening is there, which is called glottis, through which air enters into the trachea. And this glottis is guarded by epiglottis, which does not allow any food particle to enter into the trachea during the swallowing of the food. Trachea connects pharynx to the lungs, and it is C-shaped. Why it is C-shaped? To give it hardness, so that it do not get collapsed when much air is not there in it. Trachea divides a number of times to form a network of bronchioles. So what is a bronchiole? Windpipe, that is trachea, extends further and divides into primary bronchi. Its singular form is known as bronchus, and within the lungs each bronchus divides a number of times to form a network of bronchioles. Then each bronchiole terminates into a sac called alveolar sac, which is extremely thin-walled and looks like a bunch of grapes. You can see how alveoli looks like in this figure. This alveoli is surrounded by network of blood capillaries. Now you can see a pair of lungs which is present in the cavity that consists of bronchi, bronchioles and alveoli. So this bronchi, bronchioles and alveoli are all consisted in a spongy elastic bags called lungs. And you can see a rod-like structure which is joining both pairs of lungs, which is called diaphragm, which mainly helps in the process of inhalation and exhalation. Let us see how it happens. So students, let us see how breathing takes place. Breathing is the process of inhalation and exhalation of air. Here you have to keep in mind that we are not inhaling oxygen or exhaling carbon dioxide. We are inhaling the air which is rich in oxygen, and we are exhaling out the air which is rich in carbon dioxide. So let us see what happens during inhalation. When we inhale, that is, during inhalation, diaphragm pulls down, lifting the chest up. So its volume increases, that is, it expands, and oxygen-rich air from outside rushes into the lungs. During exhalation, diaphragm moves up, leading the chest down, that is, its contraction takes place. So its volume decreases, and carbon dioxide-rich air from inside rushes out of the lungs through nostrils, and this way breathing takes place. It is understood very easily with the help of this diagram. So this way, by the process of inhalation, that is during breathing, the oxygen reaches to lungs, and in the lungs alveoli are situated, which diffuses this oxygen into the blood. because medium is required to transport this oxygen to the cells or the tissues. You are knowing tissues are the group of cells. So this is done by the blood, and we know that we are having red colored pigment which is known as hemoglobin in our blood. This hemoglobin is the carrier of this oxygen. It carries this oxygen from lungs to the tissues. Now let us see how respiration takes place when this oxygen reaches to the cell or the tissue. This respiration is internal respiration. We know that respiration in humans is divided into internal and external respiration. Till now what we studied was external respiration. Now this which we are going to study is internal respiration. Inside the cell or the tissue, simplified food is already there. Now oxygen reached there through blood. This oxygen will break down the food and energy will be obtained. You can see the equation C6H12O6, that is glucose, food. When it combines with oxygen, that is when oxygen reaches to the cell, it will break down this glucose into carbon dioxide, water and energy in the form of ATP. Now this carbon dioxide is easily dissolvable substance, so it will get dissolved in the blood and will come out of the body. Now what is this ATP? We know that ATP is adenosine triphosphate. It is known as energy currency of the cell. And this energy in the form of ATP is stored in mitochondria. You have already studied it in 9th standard. See students, it is not like that when we take the food, that time only we get energy. We are having energy every time, and this is possible because this energy which is obtained during this process is stored in the form of ATP in the cells. So students, I hope now you have understood how with the help of process of respiration we get energy from the food that we eat. Now students, we will revise all these things which we have studied, and from this you will come to know how to write point wise if it is asked in the exam. First of all, we will see the common features of respiratory organs. First one is large surface area. The organs have large surface area because greater the area of tissue in contact with the environment, greater is the rate of diffusion. You are knowing what is diffusion? It is the process of exchange of gases from higher concentration to lower concentration. You have studied in 9th standard. Next is they have thin permeable walls which ensures easy diffusion and exchange of gases. Third one is extensive blood supply. Means these respiratory organs are richly supplied with blood vessels for quick transport of gases. However, in tracheal system, air reaches the tissues directly without the help of blood. And we can see the path given over here. We have already studied it. Air from external nostrils to nasal cavity. From there it passes to internal nostrils, then to pharynx, larynx, trachea, then bronchi, bronchioles and alveoli, and all these bronchi, bronchioles and alveoli are situated in lungs. So it directly passes to lungs. Now students will see the functions of various parts of respiratory system. First of all, nasal cavity. Air comes into nasal cavity through pair of external nostrils, where it is filtered by the hairs and mucus before it reaches your trachea. Then by passing through larynx and pharynx, it reaches to glottis, which is a narrow slit-like opening through which air enters into the trachea. Next is epiglottis, which guards the glottis during the swallowing of the food, so that it does not any food particle does not enter into the trachea. Now trachea, which is known as windpipe, it connects pharynx to lungs. It has a C-shaped rings of cartilage that prevent the collapse of the trachea when there is not much air in it. It divides into number of times to form a network of bronchioles. Now what is bronchi? It is windpipe extended further and divided into primary bronchi whose singular form is bronchus. Next organ is bronchioles. Within the lungs, each bronchus divide a number of times to form a network of bronchioles. Next is alveolar sac. Each bronchiole terminates into a sac called alveolar sac or alveolus. Each alveolar sac is extremely thin-walled and looks like a bunch of grapes. You have seen in the diagram. It is surrounded by a network of blood capillaries. Exchange of gases take place in the alveoli. Next is lungs. A pair of lungs are present in the thoracic cavity. Lungs are spongy, elastic bags consisting of bronchi, bronchioles and alveoli. This was about the organs which are taking part in external respiration. Now we will see how internal respiration takes place inside the cell or tissue. Different processes are mentioned over here pointwise. First of all, exchange of gases between alveolar sac and blood capillaries. So from the lungs, that is from alveoli, oxygen diffuses into the blood and the carbon dioxide from the blood diffuses into alveoli. This way exchange takes place. Now transport of gases in blood, which includes the transport of oxygen from lungs to tissue. We have already studied it. This is done by hemoglobin present in the blood. And the transport of carbon dioxide from tissue to lungs is taking place in blood only. No pigment is required because carbon dioxide is easily dissolved in blood. Next, the exchange of gases at tissue level. As a result of respiration in tissues, oxygen gets in and carbon dioxide is released out. So the tissues have more oxygen and less carbon dioxide. Due to this difference in concentration, the gases exchange take place. Tissue take in oxygen from the blood and gives out carbon dioxide. And last is the process of respiration in tissue, that is in cell, internal respiration. In the tissue, food molecules like glucose get oxidized to release ATP, carbon dioxide and water. And the aerobic respiration takes place in the mitochondria of the cell. So students, this way you can write pointwise if respiration in human beings is asked in examination. Both external and internal respiration you have to write. We studied aerobic and anaerobic respiration. Many times it is asked in the examination to write the difference between them. So you can write the difference this way. First point, it takes place in presence of oxygen and anaerobic respiration does not require oxygen. Second, it always releases carbon dioxide and it may or may not release carbon dioxide. Different substances are released like lactic acid and ethanol. Third, it provides much more energy and here less energy is provided. It occurs in cytoplasm and mitochondria. It occurs only in cytoplasm. For example, in most of the plants and animals, aerobic respiration takes place and an anaerobic respiration takes place in yeast and in muscle cells. So students, this is all about respiration. We'll continue with another life process in the next lecture.